as migrant workers?
Workers in migration contribute a lot of revenue both home and destination countries. Government should be considerate in handling the documented and the undocumented, since their revenue is never segregated for their status. I'm a migrant worker and a mother. I have a right to send my salary home at the end of the month without delay, because my children have a right to food.
Cheap labor in Uganda is the main cause of our suffering in Middle East. Government of Parliament will need a migrant workers monitoring budget as a win-win.
My boss, I'm not your wife to be touched anyhow. Respect my body for my husband. I came to serve you as a domestic migrant worker. Respect my rights.
900 years of Saudi Arabia was a cheap sale of a Ugandan made to Saudi Arabia. We need a fair pay migrant workers in Uganda.
We are migrant workers. We don't deserve to be sexual harassed. Even if you are our bosses. I hate being touched by our bosses on my body because I'm a subject. Uganda.
As a domestic migrant worker, I have a right to communicate with my home people. Your home is not a prison. Even prisoners sometimes are given a right to communicate to their families.
COVID-19 has robbed us of our liberty to return home after a contract, as our bosses have turned it into an excuse to forced labor and even the tortured no longer die of mistreatment, but slap on corona. Domestic migrant workers. Minimum wage is a liberty we deserve in our Uganda. To arrest the bleeding in Middle East migrant workers, Uganda.
How about the insurance scheme for Ugandan domestic workers? Do we deserve any insurance for our lives at work? Has there been one anyway? We are migrant workers with a right to be protected, but not criminals for arresting. Government, we need your protection from you, Uganda. Delayed payment by our bosses had made our children to suffer, and the government has done nothing about it. Migrant Workers Voice Association, Uganda.
We are migrant workers, not slaves to be exported to Middle East, Uganda.
I repeat this, I'm a migrant worker and a mother. I have a right to send my salary home at the end of the month without delay because my children have a right to food.
I'm a migrant worker and I'm a father. I have a right to be helped to leave Uganda very fast once I have an opportunity abroad. Government, companies and the ministry, the agents, stop delaying us. Stop the bureaucracy in your processes. Stop collecting our money and you keep us there idle. Yet you told us to stop working. You want to keep us in your custody.
Should migrant workers accept to overstay after contracts because Uganda is on total lockdown? How can they reach their homes after landing at the airport? that has been left open. We need clarity for our rights. Migrant Workers Voice Association.
We are tired of being deported without a fair hearing. Our bosses in Saudi Arabia should account for their actions. We are not slaves, migrant workers Uganda.
Why do Arabs recruit us from Uganda and sell us like pigs in Saudi Arabia? Who is meant to protect us, migrant workers?
Workers in migration contribute a lot revenue to both home and destination countries. Government should be considerate in handling the documented and the undocumented, since their revenue is never segregated for their status. Migrant workers Uganda.
I'm a migrant worker. I'm a father. Do I do wrong to assist my Ugandan sister suffering on the streets of Saudi Arabia when I have a job of a driver? Why do you arrest me, Saudi Arabia, and you want to deport me because I have assisted someone? It is an injustice.
We are tired of being deported without a fair hearing. Please, our bosses in Saudi Arabia should account for their actions. We are not slaves, we are migrant workers, Uganda.
A migrant workers leave accounts. Why am I denied treatment for my sickness? Wait, it's my right?
Even Filipinos are like, they have the same blood like we, the Ugandans. Why are Filipinos and other nationals are given high salary and Ugandans are given peanuts right away from home, even overseas? And why are Chinese people even are allowed to transport us from Uganda and export us to Saudi Arabia, still use us from home and away, actually sometimes paying us only 500,000 or even just small money when we are working in their industries? This is total unfairness. We call upon government to assist us and give us a way, give us a voice, give us our right. We need inclusion.
Government should be reminded we have migrant works returnees that have finished their contracts and must enter the country via the airport, which arrangement has been provided for them to reach their homes with total lockdown.
My right to work is not for sale. Stop selling us to Arab slave cows. Migrant workers, Uganda.
While we are migrant workers, we call upon our bosses in Saudi Arabia. We need to rescue as human beings like them. Migrant workers, Uganda.
As a migrant worker, I have a right to rest. Why am I not given my right to rest? If Saudi Arabian bosses cannot give us a right to rest, even the Dubai bosses, then they should also be able to be fined for that. That whoever doesn't give you a day of rest, that day is counted with an amount around 1,000 riyals or whatever amount that they have to compensate. And then we count how many days have they missed giving us to rest, such that they can also compensate us by giving us money, as they also do when they think we are wrong and they want us to compensate them.
Companies stop selling us like bananas. We deserve a voice to speak for ourselves. Migrant workers, Uganda.
We migrant workers call upon our government, the Ugandan government. We call upon you to help us, because we suffer in Arab countries, we die from Arab countries, but you don't help us, migrant workers.
Okay, thank you. Tugenda wa General Secretary tulabe yeyongera okubalambulira petition yaffe, embeera buli kimu tugenda kuba nga tulaba ensonga nyingi nnyo zagenda otugambako, agenda tuyitiramu. So tulina chairman, tulina
Rahma.
All right, thank you very much. Welcome back yet again from this exciting activity. All migrant workers abroad, in whatever country you are in, it's a great pleasure that we have come back from the parliament, and I am sure you have heard the voice that your own is speaking out for your sake. We are not sleeping. We are trying all our best to make sure that everything that has been raised or anything that affects a migrant worker is put to a consideration. We have had enough cries, and this is the time we are saying enough is enough. We are not slaves like how your friends have said. We deserve to be heard. We deserve not to be mistreated. Migrant workers have a right not to be sold as bananas. Migrant workers have a right to rest. Migrant workers have a right to send their money home on time. Migrant workers deserve to be treated like any other individual. If it wasn't the effort of migrant workers, some other individuals in Saudi Arabia would never enjoy the services they are enjoying from our fellow Ugandan migrant workers. It is today that I want to come to the notice of everyone that whatever document I presented today is a document that is beginning to open for us ways for inclusion. Like I said earlier on, I want to call on everyone who is a migrant, wherever we are, to join up together as a common voice. I'm going to take you through this document, and this document must be heard and heard clearly. If somebody is busy doing some things somewhere else, please, can we come together now and we pay attention to this document as I read through. I'm going to take it the way it is. I'm not changing anything. Please, please, please be very attentive. As you give your comments, we shall be responding to you according to your considerations. So far, so good. I have seen the comments from our fellow migrants who are outside Uganda, some of them calling for leave considerations, payment leave considerations, some of them complaining of sexual harassment, some of them complaining of a number of issues. This petition today gives a clear picture of how far we want to go as migrant workers. It is a day that we want everything sorted out for our own good. I want to start on this document, and every one of us listening to me must be carefully attentive. Number one, like I said earlier on, this petition was dated for today, and we were meant to submit to the office of the Speaker. We are taking it to the Parliament through the office of the Speaker, and I said the document reads a petition demanding for inclusion of migrant workers' voice network association in matters involving external labor recruitment process. We greet and congratulate you upon your election to the new office of the Speaker of the 11th Parliament of the Republic of Uganda, and we therefore wish you success in your new endeavors as you continue to diligently serve Ugandans and the world at large. Migrant Workers Voice Network Association is legally registered association under the laws of Uganda. It obtained its legal status on 13th November 2019 with its main objective as follows. Objective number 1, to defend the rights of migrant workers whenever there is an attack on them while at work sites in the diaspora. To solve disputes amicably among migrant workers, employers, and recruitment agencies that arise while in line of employment. The third objective is to offer legal advice and representation to migrant workers. That means collective bargaining. The fourth one is to act as a pressure group to voice out violation of the rights of migrant workers by any other authority. Objective number 5 reads that to facilitate employment of migrant workers through recognition by different relevant authorities and institutions. To set a clear and minimum wage standards for migrant workers. Those are the objectives with which we stand for. Migrant Workers Voice Network Association has brought together about 1,500 migrant workers across the globe, most especially of Ugandan origin, within a period of just 2 years of its existence, with its network still expanding with advocacy activities to have all migrant workers exiting and entering the country subscribe to the Migrant Workers Voice Network Association. The Network Association advocates for an environment with equal opportunities for growth and development to improve the quality of life and work in the international community around the world through legitimate sensitization, guidance and counseling, rehabilitation and rights advocacy, enhancing their capacity to prevent themselves from being exploited and also being exposed to human trafficking and smuggling, thus migrant workers' rights protection. In reference to the above, the Migrant Workers Voice Network Association has been a critical pillar in the advocacy of migrant workers' rights, handling challenges affecting most of the migrant workers working around the globe, mainly originating from Uganda and some from Africa to other parts of the world. In solidarity to stand with its members, mostly migrant workers from Uganda, the Migrant Workers Association has come to realize a number of gaps which require crucial attention by the following stakeholders. Stakeholder number 1, the government of the Republic of Uganda, most especially the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. External recruitment companies and their associates. All Ugandans vying for external labor services to other countries around the world. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Saudi Arabia. And to discuss the above critical issues which require critical attention by all the above stakeholders prior to any further recruitment and deployment of Ugandans, mainly to the Gulf countries. The Migrant Workers Voice Association, during its work, discovered the following most urgent areas to be attended to if the lives and rights of Ugandan migrant workers are to be saved and protected, respectively, without an authorization or compromise. The first issue that has been identified in this case is human rights advocacy and protection of Ugandan migrant domestic workers. As a right to own travel document, some Ugandans who are exported to for labor work abroad has experienced confiscation of their passports by their employees as a way of punishment and inflicting suffering to these Ugandans, rendering them helpless at their workplace. The Network Association has been and is still putting up efforts with all their energies to advocate for and protect the rights of these said Ugandans. However, the association is still being faced with the challenge of not having a clear record of all Ugandans who have been taken abroad for external labor, mainly domestic workers, because most directors of Ugandan external labor recruitment companies have deliberately refused to let their recruits register with their network association, claiming they have been given the mandate from the Ministry of Labor, which is a key pillar in their rights and advocacy and a solution seeker to problems affecting migrant workers. And yet the International Labour Standard Convention of the International Labour Organization of 1948, Article 3, Part 2 states that authorities shall refrain from any interference which would restrict the rights or impede the exercise thereof. And then the Article 29, Cap E of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda 1995 gives anyone freedom to associate him or herself to any association or form a joint association or unions, including trade unions and other civic organizations. The second weakness identified in this case that needs serious attention is weakness in the regulation of labor externalization. Withstanding the fact that labor externalization is a lucrative business where many countries have earned a lot of remittances in terms of revenue, many countries like India, Philippines, and others, with the sheer number of migrant workers from country to country, resort to organize and regulate their nationals migrating from one country to the other. Uganda earns up to $1.5 billion as a revenue remittance from labor externalization. The government of Uganda came up with a statutory instrument, Regulation of 2005, to regulate labor externalization, migration, which has not only been left on the shelves, but also ignored by the stakeholders in terms of implementation. The next factor is the rudimentary methods of solving problems pertaining labor externalization, and in that case, we are looking at the bilateral and the contractual weaknesses. Mr. Speaker, you will realize that in the Standard Contract of Domestic Service Worker, Part 22, states that the contract will be only valid for one job description at one workplace. Any subsequent agreement entered in between the employer and the domestic service worker in substitution of the said contract shall not be valid. However, oftentimes the Labor Ministry and recruiters have been reluctant on emphasizing a one-job contract, in brackets provision of not more than one workplace in one contract, and they continue to advise workers to do the contrary of what they signed for, telling them that whenever they find challenges, they are free to change from one workplace to the other, simply because they have no option and no one to stand with them in times of labor disputes, resulting to almost all the migrant workers' complaints being referred to as criminal, thus justified way always to be reported or imprisoned. Lack of sensitization and real-life culture orientation of those intending to migrate for work in the Gulf country is another challenge identified. The lack of enough orientation about a whole idea of human trafficking and slave labor migration that cuts across all regions of the country and even among countries where migrant workers come from and former returnees. Because they also influence trafficking, since they remain the ones still lobbying for their family members to continue with these unsafe jobs through shortcuts after delayed bureaucratic government processes of slave labor migration, which has led to continued loss of innocent lives due to poor decisions and actions taken while protecting themselves in the wake of the reality on ground. The other factor we have identified as a factor of crucial attention is the lack of facilitation for the migrant workers monitoring system. The government has been adamantly resistant to facilitate the structures that are meant to aid Ugandans who leave the country legally in search for jobs to work for a living, that is to say, allocation of funds in the national budget, and can be used to make monitoring and follow-ups easy and transparent for the embassy officials or any other party involved. Leaving the monitoring task to the recruiters, whose primary aim of recruitment is to make profits but not spend their earned profits in monitoring the working conditions of these already deployed Ugandan migrants. Giving chance to the employers to subject these Ugandan migrant workers under their hands to any condition they wish to. Mr. Speaker, in the same line, the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development came up with a recruitment, making all licensed companies deploying girls in Saudi Arabia to have one Ugandan coordinator attached to and paid by the Saudi office, in which case we find these coordinators remains a tool to be used by the Saudi counterparts in proper torturing, cover-ups, and also endorsement of all mayhems, since he or she does not have capacity or cannot make bad reports against their boss. Many Ugandans exported by licensed companies have been left unreached after outcries of torture, oppression, forced labor, sexual harassment, salary denials and delays, and no communication rights, and yet their country back home cannot explain well how all this comes about, since they are limited and not empowered of what exactly transpires in the houses where these migrant workers work individually, unless revealed by their country counterpart offices in foreign destinations, who do not reveal the right picture on ground of protecting their own citizens, and also, if that's not enough, these countries also become stubborn to cooperate with Ugandan recruitment companies, especially when the contracts expire and the partners involved in the contract have grudges of uncleared dues, and the whole thing remains a casted sham. The reality is that licensed companies play their role up to ticketing of these migrant workers, and it is from that point where most of the Ugandan migrant workers begin to see the bad days of suffering, since they are left with no one to follow them up on how their working conditions are wherever they have been deployed to work. The other most important and the last urgent issue identified in this case is the intentional minimizing of the existing Migrant Workers Association by the listed stakeholders in the issues concerning migrant workers, thus ending migrant workers robbed of their rights to associate for a better collective bargaining, as it was embedded in the International Labour Standards of International Organization Convention, Labour Organization Convention of 1948, Article 3, Part 2, and Article 29, Cap E of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. All these documents respectively states that the public authority shall refrain from any interference which would restrict or impede the lawful exercise thereof. The Article 29, Part E or Cap E of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda also states that every citizen of Uganda is free to choose to subscribe him or herself to any association, union, including trade unions and other civic organizations. And according to the general principles and operational guidelines of fair recruitment of migrant workers, requirement number 3, there is a note of freedom of association. The employers must take proactive approaches to facilitate migrant workers' rights to freedom of association and specifically at least access to trade unions representatives, access to collective bargaining, possibility to raise complaints or issues to workers' committee. Mr. Speaker, we wonder if the Ministry of Gender, Labour, Gender of Uganda and Saudi Arabia and the Embassy of Uganda in Saudi Arabia and the Ugandan Recruiters Association are the workers' committees to always receive complaints of workers as recommended in the IOL, which is International Labour Organization General Principle of Recruitment. Possibilities to access grievances mechanisms. As labour exploitation business picked up its pace and started becoming lucrative, the government of Uganda, through the office of the then Minister for Gender, Labour and Social Development, Honorable Janet Mukwaya, directed that all external labour exploitation processes be made legal as a measure of protecting Ugandans from being victims of challenges associated with external labour recruitment processes. Most external labour recruitment companies started emerging with legal licenses of operation to recruit Ugandans from domestic service work in the Arab countries. As labour business continued to gear up, the huge business profits realized, the labour recruitment processes lost its meaning because the external recruitment licensing process was manipulated with money, which gave rise to many recruitment companies who now recruit young unemployed Ugandans for external labor to the United Arab Emirates to do domestic work as the recruiters gain their profit per head. Hell broke loose when the statutory instrument regulation of 2005 empowered the very perpetrators to be in charge of the meat stores. As quoted in the section 69 of the very regulation, the recruiting agencies, in other words, the perpetrators, were empowered to be in charge of assisting these migrants or those they deploy for a profit, assuming that they will minimize the compromise that comes with it. As quoted in this, a recruitment agency shall ensure that workers deployed overseas are amply protected and their interests and well-being are promoted. We wonder how these businessmen who work for profit could protect the interests, their business and the rights of those they deploy, as they would assume that a folks can be in charge of a meat store and this meat would remain safe. We further noted that the same regulation 78 states that Ugandan migrant workers were obliged to abide by the terms and conditions of the contracts dedicated to them, in which case the contract frame and resolution did not seek consent of inclusion of those it was meant to benefit, and yet was made a forceful obligation for migrant workers to consent for what they did not did not represent their interest. Migrant workers were forcefully obliged to respect customs, morals, conditions, traditions, and practices of countries in which they were destined for work, even without prior orientation. Migrant workers were robbed of a liberty to benefit from their remittances when government has never considered a cashback, even in any form of monitoring budget, meant to facilitate their protection and welfare of those meant to protect them while overseas. Mr. Speaker, it is very unfortunate that migrant workers have continued to do their part of remitting their revenue to the government up to date, and only the private recruiters bear the burden of soliciting funds in the guise of monitoring fees to allow and protect those who deploy themselves into the mayhem. Ugandan migrant workers were meant to be ambassadors of goodwill, protecting only the good in Uganda and restrained from tarnishing Ugandan image abroad without liberties to have their interests represented. In Article 1 of the bilateral, workers were refrained from committing acts which were detrimental to the interests of their employer or recruitment agency during his or her documentary and employment, something we find as an injustice to the liberty of speech and expression. Yet in the end, these workers are supposed to account for what it was imposed on them without their consent to whatever they would be subjected to, but only to be dictated on what to do or what to be done. We therefore would like to ask Parliament to give description and a difference between what was entailed in a whole regulation, system trafficking and human trafficking, since the end always justifies the means that even those deployed under slave labor migration have continuously suffered under the guise of slave labor migration and have continued to suffer even worse than those who were trafficked. Recruitment who were trafficked. And from this point again, we would like to ask Parliament to require Ministry of Labour to produce all deployment reports per order registered and cleared by the Ministry since 2005, when regulation was brought in place in relation to the actual number of migrant workers deployed, and confirmed by the Embassy Registry to cross-match and indeed avoid possible job or the irregularity. For if a company A in Saudi Arabia was permitted and cleared by the ministry to recruit 500 workers in one job order, where is the accountability of local agency clearing the actual number without exiting the number authorized in the record? And if such has not been happening, we call on the Parliament to task the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development to give us reports as were submitted by recruitment agencies since 2006 to date, to clearly spell themselves that indeed they have not been systemically trafficking of these migrant workers themselves. We want an assurance from them that companies did not clear a number beyond what was cleared by the ministry. We wonder how would migrant workers abide by the regulations and rules and regulations aimed at promoting the migrant workers' interests and enhancing national gains to achieve when the workers themselves have got no stake in decision making. That the agency shall be responsible for the faithful compliance by the foreign principle of all obligations under the employment contract, and therefore be liable for any and all violations of the contract, something we find it as an injustice done both by the licensed recruiters and the migrant workers themselves, since none of them is empowered with jurisdictions to command the following principles. And in this case, we came to a conclusion or a recommendation and way forward to the government. In reference to the letter dated 2nd September 2019, quote number AP 1161/01, written by the office of the former Speaker of the Republic of Uganda, Right Honorable Alitwala Rebecca Kadaga, titled Inclusion of Migrant Workers' Voice in Matters Concerning Migrant Workers as Stakeholders. The former Speaker had directed the then Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development to address the issues raised by the Migrant Workers' Voice Association as stakeholders in external labor recruitment process, demanding for inclusion in handling of critical issues concerning external labor recruitment process. The Minister then responded by the letter dated 13 September 2019, quote number MGLSD 01, acknowledging the Speaker's directive and promised to avail the office of the Speaker with necessary actions in order to respond to concerns as were directed by the Speaker. However, to date, no action has been taken to have Migrant Workers' Voice Network Association included in matters concerning external labor recruitment process. The purpose of this petition, therefore, is to request your honorable office to give a directive to the Parliament to address the following very crucial issues for urgent handling by the new Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. One most important issue that we raised in the purpose is a complete revision of terms of the standard employment contracts that are slapped on migrant workers without their representation and yet forcefully pushed on them to be signed by their recruiters, thus ending migrant workers in misery and agony after reaching their place of deployment, only to find they were forced to sign for what they cannot bear, yet on debt bondage. But though some tend to endure sincerely, since they were left with no option, that even if they return home, they only become jobless or underpaid without a standard minimum wage. Also, to instruct the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development to give a directive to all external labor recruitment companies to have all their recruits associate in a one pool network association right from home, as recruiters are able to associate from the coordinated voice of representation without compromise from any authority. And the petition also calls for an immediate endorsement of the minimum wage to curtail the number of those migrating to Middle East for wages, if this cannot be protected by migrant workers' monitoring budget, to appreciate their sole endurance by leaving the country humbly, with or without education, to avoid being a nuisance in their country, when they stay unemployed and underpaid in their own home country. The petition also calls for urgent consideration for urgent monitoring of the budget for migrant workers, since these workers contribute to the national revenue remittance of up to $1.5 billion. Superseding coffee and many other domestic revenue collecting activities, something that should be considered as an urgent priority in the protection of their rights regardless. The petition calls for immediate halting of the move by the Ministry of Gender to increase external labor licensing fees, since this simply justifies human trafficking as the only and quickest cheap way to exit the country for external labor, and yet the recruiters are not ready to miss the business benefits in recruitment when the fees are hiked. The petition also calls on the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development to produce all the deployment audits reports of each company recruiting Ugandans for external labor since 2016 to date, as submitted by the external recruitment companies, indicating numbers cleared by the ministry as job orders were endorsed from the embassy in equation to total number of Ugandan migrant workers deployed in Saudi Arabia received by the embassy. The petition also calls on the ministry to give the accountability of the previous insurance and compensation policy, which is a worker's right and ought to be effected from the first day of effecting the working contract, and to clearly indicate where in the standard employment contract and the bilateral was the insurance of migrant workers mentioned, and if it was really an important issue before they drove the insurance policy very fast, yet they have already deployed hundreds of thousands of Ugandan workers without a clear insurance scheme, and should give us a report clearly indicating how the policy benefits the beneficiaries. The petition further calls on the government to stop foreign companies from recruiting Ugandans directly without involving migrant workers' representation in the recruitment process, as this only ends migrant workers to grave slavery, since the recruiter is a foreigner and he or she has a liberty to sell his merchandise who is a migrant worker at any price, anywhere in their country, with nobody following up. Yet Ugandan companies cannot even be allowed to open up independent offices in their destination countries. The petition further calls for complete inclusion of Migrant Workers Network Association as a technical stakeholder in matters concerning external labor recruitment process for a balanced representation of migrant workers. It also directs for the immediate review of terms of bilateral for Uganda, between Uganda and Saudi Arabia or other Middle East countries receiving Ugandan migrant workers. The petition calls on the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development to involve Migrant Workers Voice Network Association in clearance of their members before deploying for a better representation and protection of their rights while at work, being compromised by the stakeholders in the recruitment and other authorities. And lastly, the petition seeks clarity from the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development about how the recruitment agencies will protect the rights of their merchandise, who are the migrant workers,